website. Actually, I'll show you this. And you scroll down to the bottom. It's the one that says Proposition 2.5 override. So there it is. Excellent. Well, we're going to move now to our question and answer sessions. And we're going to start with some folks in the room. But before we do that, I just want to start with one question that I received, which is, can you explain what exactly an override is? And maybe that's a question for our treasurer. You may have to turn the mic on again.
All right, how about now?
A little closer, maybe.
Can you hear me? Okay.
You got to, like, eat the microphone.
That I'm not going to do. All right, so, you want me?
Yep,
I guess
sorry.
I'll use that one. That's fine. All right, so there are a couple of different things that have been discussed, but recently, as recent as last night, they've been talking about debt exclusion. So there's 3 different things that you can vote on to increase revenue related to overrides or exclusions. There's a tax override, Proposition 2.5, which is what we're discussing here. There's a debt exclusion and an expenditure exclusion. Specifically, a debt override puts the city council, provides the community the opportunity to make a determination on whether they want to increase the tax levy, which is the overall tax amount that the city can collect, and that amount would be spread out across all real estate and personal property taxes. What that allows us to do is increase the revenue that the city collects on an annual basis, and that is a permanent increase. Unlike a debt exclusion, where a debt exclusion is only on an annual base until the debt expires, an override allows us to fund general fund operations on an ongoing basis and can help us plan more accordingly. I don't know if it's working or not.
Testing.
I guess I have to be closer.
Do you mind if I just, So I just wanted to pop in because I think there's unfortunately been some issues with the YouTube stream, and I think we have a lot of folks joining us just right now who are watching from home. So I want to thank our Special Assistant to the Mayor, Maria Louise, for popping into the back and working with our cable access station to try to get us back on. Oh no. Oh, okay. That gave me a scare for a minute. So I just want to reiterate to folks who might be joining in from home just now who may have missed parts of the mayor's presentation. We will be rebroadcasting this. If you did miss it, it'll be showing on UMA, on YouTube, and on cable. And it's not too late to submit questions. So if you did miss the presentation, please still use the QR code. Maybe we could re-show that, if that's okay, Councilor McDonald, just to catch folks up. Whether you saw all or part of the presentation, we would still love to have your questions and comments coming in so that we can have a conversation tonight. And just want to apologize for the technical issues that we had. So welcome if you're just joining us now, and sorry for that, but please do submit your questions since we're just getting started with that portion of the program.
All right, thank you very much. I'd like to start by taking some questions in the room, and I'm just going to ask folks to kind of line up on this side of the podium and then come on up. And then when you come on up, we'll ask you to share your name and give us at least your street if you don't want to give us your full address. And then we'll give you your 2 minutes to offer your question or comment. So anyone in the room, if you'd like to start, please get us started. Can we make sure that the microphone is working?
Do I have to eat the mic?
I think you just may have to get a little closer.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Yep.
Hi, my name is Chloe. I live at 45 Loomis Street in Malden. My question is, there are a lot of renters in Malden, and this is a property tax override or real estate tax override. And I'm wondering, for all the renters out there, is there a chance that this will affect their rent directly or indirectly?
Would one of you like to respond to that?
So that is a possibility, how a landlord determines to pass on any of their costs, whether it be related to taxes, utilities, or anything to that effect, is really dependent on how the landlord chooses to do so. If it is a resident owner occupied multifamily, they are getting the additional 35%, the additional 5% residential exemption. Now, whether they use that money to decrease people's rents is unlikely, But we do know that rent is a market-driven basis, so you can only charge as much rent as the market is willing to bear. We don't believe that this is going to have any sort of significant impact for anyone's rent, but that is a possibility. We just can't answer that unilaterally.
And if I can also say, you know, if you look at from my perspective as city councilor, because this came up in our discussion at the council meeting, and so I went ahead and tried to read some of the economics research on this, and what it really says is that it is not a one-for-one relationship. Certainly, I think with really large tax increases, it's more likely to do that. This is quite a modest tax increase relative to the total bill that a non-resident would be paying. The bills obviously go to the landlords, not the renters, and renters are usually in structured, you know, leases that, you know, kind of define what kind of increases are possible. So I just want to say that the research on this does not show that moderate increases in property taxes are going to be directly tied to changes in leasing. But as our treasurer said, there is no way to guarantee that. We do know that if you are a homeowner, you will end up paying more in taxes, but there's no way to guarantee that one way or another. Okay. All right, please come forward.
Mr. Mayor, councilors, Danny Warren, Ward 5. I'm a 30-year employee of a municipality not far from here, and also past and present union president of a couple of unions in there. I've been notified, so we're doing override requests probably in March, and I've been notified today on several cost-saving measures anticipated, and I was just wondering when we can expect your belt-tightening techniques to come.
No set date, but it will be part of this exercise. In the amount that we listed here, it will be in that vicinity. So on our end, on the government's end, I guess, we're looking at $3 million from changing our employees' health plan, plus roughly $2 million in cuts.
I've been notified today of potential hiring freezes, 4 or 5 positions definitely in public works, and I was wondering if you anticipate anything like that for open positions currently.
Yes.
Yep.
Part of the conundrum for us, back to that formula, is most of what we have to do is going to be on the non-school side. Not that you want to cut schools, but they are the biggest part of the budget. And so typically in a situation like this, you would just spread the cuts across the board. But because of the way that formula is constructed, it's not allowing us to do that. So therefore, we're going to have to look inward, you know, to get to where we need to go.
And then just one more question. Why not a debt exclusion?
A debt exclusion, I'll pass it off to my colleagues, typically is for an initiative, a project, something new that you don't want to put on the books of the government because you're not in a position to do so. This is purely an operating issue. So we don't believe that is the right mechanism or tool to use at this point. I don't know if Ron wants to add to that.
Yeah, I mean, I guess just to add to what the mayor said, the only way you can use a debt exclusion is in concert with a new borrowing or an existing borrowing that qualifies for that capital expenditure, whereas our problem are truly just affording, you know, sort of the day-to-day operational expenses of running the city department. So certainly, you know, it's a valid thing for somebody to bring up to the extent that there's future things, but where we're at right now, it wouldn't solve this problem. It would, you know, create a new expenditure and then keep it off the books, but it would still leave this challenge that we have today.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Could I just add just one thing related to the debt exclusion? A debt exclusion does not reduce your tax liability. It still increases the cost to each individual person in the community. So when we're talking about debt exclusions or proposition overrides, the debt exclusion is just another way to get more money from the community to cover either new expenses or, to Ron's point, pre-existing borrowing. So I just want to make sure that people are clear. When you say debt exclusion, we would still require a vote, and the community would still have to contribute, you know, more funds.
The only thing that I wanted to add too is that I think there are some, to the mayor's point, when you talk about doing, you know, hiring freezes or funding cuts, there are some positions that, you know, pay for themselves tenfold by bringing in grants that we don't want to lose. And there are also funding or programmatic minimums or staffing minimums on top of the schools, which we can't touch. There are standards that we don't want to fall below, which because we'll lose certification standards for a lot of departments, where we would then be penalized by the state or other certification bodies. So it's not as simple as saying we'll make a 10% cut across the board. It's going to have to be a little bit more precise than that when we do get to those. So there are things that we need to be very carefully considering when we do get to considering those cuts. And Councilor McDonald, did you have another point?
Just one point, because this came up at last night's council meeting. We had one proposal to consider a debt exclusion, right? Specifically around the cost of the VOC. And while it is temporary, yes, but it's like 30 years of temporary. And so that is something that we can talk about, which is, and it would then resolve 1.4 million of this $8+ million gap. The paper that we are discussing tonight is really about the override that the mayor has proposed. So I think if that is, if that doesn't end up making it to the ballot or becoming a part of what the future of our city is, then maybe we can look at some other options. But the thing that we're trying to keep our eye on is what actually closes the operating gap. And any way that goes, if we don't cut, then we have to go to the voters to ask for more income. And so we're trying to figure out what the most transparent, effective, and fiscally responsible way to do that is. I'm not sure that I'm particularly interested in having an override and a debt exclusion at the same time on the ballot. So I think we're trying to focus this forum, which is posted around the override and the kind of operating funding that the mayor has outlined here. And then there's always the possibility for us to talk about debt exclusions in the future as well. So, thank you. Please come forward.
Hi, folks. Can you hear me? Cool. Sarah Zyberg, 29 Sprague Street. First off, I want to say thank you to you guys for finally asking us for help. I've known all of you probably for longer than a 29-year-old should. I've grown up here. I was the first generation that actually went through the new schools. So I am completely a product of what happens when Malden actually invests in itself and is given that opportunity. So I'm seeing a lot of sad, serious faces, and I know all of you have your happy sides, and I know you all care really deeply about this city. So my first question is, this feels like a $5 million Band-Aid, right? It's not gonna solve the problem. It's not the cure. If you were to ask us for a more reasonable cure, I don't know if you've thought of what that number could be. You don't have to do the math for me right now. But I'm just curious if there's other options out there. I know Melrose just passed an override with a tiered question, which is a really interesting approach that I would also appreciate if you could consider. And yeah, I think Malden, when given the opportunity, wants to invest in itself. Asking us for just $5 million, and I say that not having that much in my bank account, it limits our choice. It limits what we're willing to give you to take care of us, and that is your job. So I'm just wondering if there's an opportunity to think about asking for more from us. I know we ask a lot from you guys, so feel free to give it back to us. Doing the quick math, 5 million override plus the 3 million that hopefully GIC will bring in, and then the 2 million in cuts, that's 10 million. In between is 7, so that's 3 options. Just something to consider.
Thank you, and I just want to note, we had one question submitted by resident Sarah Radcliffe Mars, who also asked a very similar question. I'm concerned that a $5.4 million override doesn't really seem to be enough to avoid layoffs next year and bridge the next few years. I know Melrose recently presented a 3-option override vote, which gave voters more choices. Could we consider that in Malden?
And there was a request online to repeat the gist of the question, because that mic isn't coming.
Okay, thank you. So we'll make sure that we repeat the questions. And so now I'm just going to paraphrase super quickly, that the question was, have we considered asking for more than the 5.4 million, since we've said that that is not enough to avoid cuts, and what consideration has been made to the kind of structure that they just did in Melrose, which gave different tiers of options. And so maybe you can respond to that, Mr. Mayor, and then we can talk a little bit more about what that was at Melrose.
I think we add Sarah to the committee. We did consider that. And out of respect to our city, to our residents, we just decided to go with the lowest amount. I mean, it should be more, to be honest with you. But being mindful of where everyone is today, we just tried to close the present gap. But the speaker is correct. You know, we did consider it probably should be more, but that's what we ended up doing.
Yeah, I guess let me just add something, Mr. Mayor, if you don't mind. One of the most difficult things about sort of urban city finances is we are so dependent upon our partnership with the state when it comes to funding education. And there are tremendous swings year to year in what we get for aid from the state to fund our schools. And so in the last 5 years, the aid increase from the state year over year has ranged from $200,000 to $9 million. So I always say to the mayor when he says, how do you think the budget's going to be next year? I say, I'll let you know on January 27th, which is when we find out whether it's 200,000, 9 million, or something in between. So when you talk about trying to do what you know, Sarah, I think you've suggested, which is to plan a little bit longer term, you know, it certainly is a thoughtful thing and something that we'd love to do. And yet there is no way for us to predict what that number is year over year from the state and whether or not it's going to dig this hole deeper, or whether or not it's going to be a year when it's not that bad. And it's absolutely something that's unique to sort of these gateway urban cities. When you get to the wealthier cities, they don't get as much state aid because they don't need as much, but at the same time it makes their finances a little bit more steady stream because they're very much dependent upon, you know, their own revenue increases year over year, which are a lot more predictable. So again, a little bit of a long answer to speak to why the longer term planning exercises are a little bit more difficult in an urban environment. So thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Kate Quinn, 77 Mountain Ave.
Kate, I just wonder, is there any closer you can get to that microphone?
How about this?
That's better.
I can also just project if you would prefer.
But the folks on Urban Media Arts watching the live stream greatly appreciate
Hi.
it. Yeah.
So Kate Quinn, 77 Mountain Ave. I'm also at 36 Salem Street at the Malden Public Library. And I am now the dreaded comment and not the question. But I will ask a question at the end. So thank you for just bearing with me while I read this as fast as humanly possible. I'm actually here on behalf of my union. I'm the president of the Library Union, AFSCME Local 3945 at the Malden Public Library. And of course, we're for the Prop 2.5. Wholehearted support. It's necessary, complete, and timely funding for the city services and municipal departments of the city of Malden. We encourage the city council to vote to advance the Prop 2.5, and we encourage our residents to vote for it. You guys have laid out exactly what we need and why we need it and why it is important to continue to fund these services. And before I get into my spiel about why libraries are so important and why our civil servants are so important and our fire department and our police department and our schools are so important, I want to stand here and say thank you for what you've all done and for bearing with us and for trying to make it work. And I think that we need to ask for more. I think that every one of us in this room that works for this city, every one of us that walks into a city office and needs something or gives something can do more to lift each other up and to meet the needs as we're moving forward. I think our library is a testament to that. Our library is built on the concept of giving everyone a chance. And if we're not funding it, if we are not funding our services the way they are needed, then we are denying people that chance. And I love that we're trying to balance the needs of people who maybe don't have enough, but I would like to see us move forward. Carrie, do you have something?
That is 2 minutes.
Oh, it's 2 minutes. Okay, so very quickly, here's my question. Can we please ask for more? Can we please go with this tiered approach? If you move the date, if we move forward, is it possible to add additional requests of our community?
Thank you. Let me just say the legal answer to that question is that the language of the ballot measure, the date, the amount, how we ask for it, has not been finalized. It gets finalized through a vote of the city council. So yes, it is possible. Clearly, we've got some folks here who are advocating for that tonight. I just wanted to really quickly recap what this is, if folks hadn't tracked this in Melrose. So Melrose, which is a substantially smaller city, right? Like I think they probably have, I don't know, half as much as we have. Oh, see, I accidentally pressed the thing. Too many computers. So Melrose asked for an override question on the ballot this year. So in November, a couple weeks ago, and they had 3 versions of their override question. And questions 1A, 1B, and 1C. And the instructions on the ballot read, questions 1A, 1B, and C are separate questions. You may vote for or against each question independently. Each question requires a majority of those voting on that question to pass, and if more than one question passes, the question with the highest dollar amount will prevail. So 1C was for $9.3 million, 1B was for $11.9 million, and 1A was for $13.5 million, and they had a little description about which each of those were. So all 3 of those, I believe, passed, so they go with the 1A option in Melrose. But that's what folks are. I just want to make sure we share that because that has now been coming up. Did you want to say something additional, Ms. Moran? Okay, great. I think, yes, next.
Hi, Caitlin Pilson from Columbia Street. I'm also someone who's interested in the city investing in our public servants and our schools and trying to do more than the bare minimum of what the state requires and like getting past that penalty level. So from what I'm hearing, I feel like a higher number than 5 million is warranted. I have a couple of questions. One, can you levy less or return funds to taxpayers if we override a higher number and don't need the money? 2, I know the numbers that you put up on the screen for the increase, like my homeowner's insurance has gone up more than that in a single year. And I heard that if we make cuts to the fire department, like homeowner's insurance would jump because we lose a certain level of certification. So I'm concerned about that number if we don't pass an override. And then, I was just gonna note, I feel like the variability in what the state will send us for support means that a higher number would make more sense because we don't know.
Thank you. I want to note that echoes, this is our first reference to a Menti question that someone submitted, which is about that question, about homeowners insurance and whether sorry, let me just double check that. Whether cuts to our fire department could lead homeowners insurance to go up and whether that is true. My understanding from our fire department, and this is very rough, so I think this is one we probably need to look up a little bit more and post a comment on that. My understanding from our fire department is that our fire department is certified at a specific level, and residential homeowner property insurance policies in Malden are in part based on the certification of our fire department. So if we were to cut services that impacted that certification because it changed the services our fire department could provide, then yes, that could lead to a change in the way, in the prices or the access or the rates that homeowners and those who hold property insurance might be able to access. But I think we need a little more information to know, kind of how tight or close that relationship is. So this is a great question. I'm really glad this has surfaced.
Address the tax question? Yeah. So to address your question about decreasing taxes, in the event that we passed an override, and we found that we were flush with cash and were able to manage all of our operations without needing any excess cash. There's one of two ways that we could reduce the future tax burden. One is to not increase the tax amount to the full Prop 2.5 limits, maximize our tax levy. That would be something that the city council would vote on. So they could choose to, instead of going at the top 2.5, they could go to 2 or something to that effect. The other way is you could propose an underride where you would decrease your tax levy. That would then have to go to the city council and then go to the constituents to vote. So, but the easiest and most prudent way would be to just to not increase to the full levy in the event that we found that we had, generated so much more money that we couldn't do anything responsibly with it.
And I just wanted to add to your second question about whether or not something like insurance could be impacted. It could. And for people who have, again, zeroed in on whether or not this is a spending issue, it is not, from my perspective. The fire, police, and public works department have been at roughly the same staffing levels since we began back in 2012. So if we were to impact those departments, and again, they would be a part of this, it could affect what happens to the community by reducing those, what are already considered low numbers for a city of our size.
Mayor, can I just add to that, and I know Council McDonald mentioned the section of the website that provides some comparative data. And one of the ones that will jump out at you, and I only mention this because somebody brought up public safety, is, we show for fiscal year '24 what Malden spent per resident for public safety as compared to communities around us. So we spend $432 per resident for public safety in fiscal year '24. Our friends in Everett, and I truly mean that, they are our friends, the mayor and I met with them the other day, they spend $783 per resident on public safety. Not surprisingly, the formula for education requires that 44% of our tax and local receipt revenue goes towards funding that education formula, and in Everett, it's only 26%. So you see the correlation, right? So if you look at every community, Medford, Peabody, Revere, Salem, Somerville, we spend less per capita on public safety in just about every other category. So to the mayor's point, I think, look, any city, anybody can look and find something within the budget that they feel like could or should be cut, because so much of that is based upon our sort of personal values and what have you. But when you look at comparative data, I think it shows that we aren't starting from a place of true excess waste. So thank you.
Great, thank you. Can we get a few more comments in the room, and then I'm going to go to some questions that have been submitted by email? Please.
Hello, I'm Katie Dillon. I'm at 198 Mount Vernon. Thank you for having this forum, and I want to echo what the last couple people said. I do think that maybe we aren't asking for enough. I'm curious how the cuts now will affect the unhoused population and how we serve them here in Malden.
Thank you, Katie. So just to make sure folks online could hear, so the question was about whether we could ask for more money and how potential cuts that were mentioned could affect services to the unhoused population here in Malden.
I don't think I could say right now, but everything is on the table. There isn't a single thing that we're doing that we're not looking at to try to get to that number of cuts. And it will be against my better nature, but in order to ensure that we're all in this together, they are all on the table.
Can I just add, it's, but I do think it highlights what makes this exercise a difficult one, which is, sort of behind the numbers are people doing jobs, and sometimes, and the question was about housing and housing support, right? I guess I'll more globally define it at that, and that's something that comes out of our OSPCD, our Strategic Planning and Community Development Office. There's probably the equivalent of 1.5 folks that work on this. There isn't a team of folks, right? So when you talk about a department that has 1.5 folks there, and if you were to cut one of them, you know, you've really, really, really impacted that function. And that's really the challenge that we have, trying to figure out where you can make an impact across a budget without leaving something, you know, truly unaddressed as an important topic in this community. And there are very few things that have a large number of people working on them. There's a lot of things that have, Council Linney had mentioned grants. We've got one person, Rebecca, does a great job, Malden resident, and yet if that person would no longer be working on grants, we'd have none, right? So I think it's what makes it difficult, and where, you know, cuts can lead to things going from 60 to 0.
And just one other thing that Ron just reminded me of. Again, I've been mayor since 2012, and I think one of the greatest initiatives that we have put together is the Office of Housing Stability, which is a partnership with Housing Families. That is at risk. And I can tell you the #1 call that we have received since 2012 right through today is about housing. And so, as Ron mentioned, we have someone on staff that is doing what they can, but you need, I think everybody here in the room knows, you need experts. How to navigate the courts, how to find housing, how to find employment. And that's what this office has been doing, you know, thanks to the American Rescue Plan Act. But as you know, those funds have since ended, and we're going to have to make a big decision coming up, one that I don't want to make because I have seen the value of having someone that we can go to anytime someone calls City Hall about housing.
Yeah, and I don't want to beat this question to death, but I think it is really important to underscore, and thank you, Katie, for the question. I couldn't agree more with what's been said already. I think, you know, any folks in the room who've ever emailed me and get a response, you'll see in my email signature, I have the Office of Housing Stability right there, because it's hands down the most requested service that I get asked for. And if I don't have it in my email signature, it's the only thing I'm really, you know, responding with, especially as we get into winter and folks are looking for utility assistance because they provide that help as well. This is, you know, our web analytics show that this is the most visited web page. Folks are looking for this help. The picture, you know, the mayor and I, before this meeting, were at the Affordable Housing Trust Fund Board meeting. We were talking about how there's been a drop-off in state and federal resources to support supportive housing, you know, resources for addressing homelessness. So this is really a crisis issue right now, and if we lose, to Ron's point, the staff that we've invested in City Hall that are helping us to source grants, these are things that have generational impacts, and that kind of gets to the thing I was talking about earlier, where you cut one position, which, you know, 30 years ago we did do in our planning office. We then weren't in the position of being able to invest in and bring in those dollars when they were available, and we've been able to do that. So I really think that we're at a point where if we make those cuts, it might seem like just one position, but it has those 10, 20, 30-year horizon impacts out that we need to think about for the community looking ahead. And the last point I just want to make, I've seen some folks ask, it hasn't come in tonight, but I've gotten the question, you know, as we talk about an override, why not contemplate eliminating the Community Preservation Act surcharge from the ballot? And I just want to mention that tonight because I want folks to understand that 1% surcharge on our taxes is one of the key ways that we get money into our coffers to be able to fund, to build up a kitty, to have money to invest in affordable housing. So, like I said, it hasn't come up as a question tonight, but it is something that I'm hearing percolating. I would just urge us to not take that step, because I think that when we lose state and federal resources in the climate, the political climate that we're in, that is something that most folks barely notice on their tax bill, but it helps us to build up a fund that we can draw on when those opportunities come up, like the homeless veterans housing that we are looking to build, that we voted to hopefully fund tonight in the meeting just prior to this one. So thank you for the question. Sorry to take so long on that answer, but I think it's illustrative of what's at stake when we have what feel like small dollars and just one position, one person, but has the potential to be really pivotal and to ricochet across the community for a long time. Yeah, sure.
I'm sorry, one more point, just to really bring it home and make it real, and that is the other day We had a high school student on our couch at City Hall, 4th floor, mayor's office. What are we gonna do? State and federal government's not gonna do anything, but the Office of Housing Stability did. Within one phone call, they're in our office working with this student, and I'm happy to say because of their assistance, the student is back on track. I just don't know how you replace that in the world we live in today.
All right, thank you all. I think I've got maybe 3 folks right here, and, right, okay. Okay, we got one more person in the room right now. Then we'll take more, so come on forward. I just want to let folks know so you're not standing and waiting. After this comment, I'm going to read some of the comments that have been emailed and submitted in Menti, and we'll do that for a while, and then we'll get back to what's in the room. So please, go ahead.
Hi, okay. Sierra Harkin, 32 Lynn Street. So coming from the biotech industry, which has obviously had numerous funding issues, and then also in my background, I'm from like a very small rural town in North Idaho originally. Like my high school required supplemental levy funding to keep basic operations. So I have seen the impacts of things that may not appear to be significant impact in the moment, and how that actually like ripples out across the community. Like many very talented students left the school district when things like academic decathlon were cut. And I'm only mentioning this because a lot of the discussion I've seen online tends to be very critical of this, and I'm coming here just to understand more of what's going on. And I think one of the other points that has come up is the fact that we're kind of also looking at increasing the primary residence deduction, which I think is something very unique for the area. And as a young homeowner, I'm very grateful that we have that as an option. But the thing that pairs with that is that then that would require a displacement of property tax revenue, presumably to a commercial tax basis. So that is to say, I understand the concerns of a lot of residents that are worried about us being squeezed as individuals. Obviously, investment in the commercial tax basis of the community is really important. And I'm curious if the Strategic Planning Office can talk a little bit more about what concrete strategies we're looking at utilizing to incentivize that structure moving forward to generate additional revenue.
But before you answer, I just thank you so much for that question. I want to add in a very similar question that we got through email. This is from Samantha LeBlanc at 30 Daniel Street, who asked, is the impact on our annual tax bill that's mentioned on the website, which is what we have on the slide here today, if we can show that to the folks at home again, including or excluding this residential exemption? And if a person lives at home, does that mean that this changes by 30%? Or how are these two things interacting? And so I think this would be a great time to just make sure that we explain what that is, because I think it's like maybe the most complicated part of all this, and a different piece of the law, but it interacts. So could you all just talk us through the residential exemption piece, and then I think we can come back to the economic development, commercial development question, because we have a couple questions about that as well.
Sure. So, the tax setting process at a municipal level is definitely a little bit of a dance between, in the case of Malden, homeowner occupied, non-owner occupied, and the commercial side, right? So when the city, through the mayor and the council, decided to offer a residential exemption, that took a portion of the residential tax burden and shifted it from owner-occupied homes to non-owner occupied homes. In addition, the typical community in Massachusetts, and Malden's included in that, is allowed to and does shift the maximum tax burden that's allowed from the residential base to the commercial base, which is why those communities that have a healthy commercial base, you look at a community like Burlington, are doing so well because they can take a portion of the residential burden and shift 50% over to the commercial piece. Some folks may have heard earlier this year, Boston was proposing to be able to increase that maximum in response to the fact that their commercial base, was hurting this year, and they didn't want that to be felt by the residential side, and so their proposal to do that was to be able to shift more of it to the commercial side, right? So the three of them have an interplay, but the residential exemption specifically is a shift from the owner-occupied to the non-owner-occupied, The commercial shift is a separate and distinct shift that happens, you know, when the assessor's office sets the tax rate each year. So they're really two different things. How does this impact, Council McDonald? And I know the mayor mentioned some numbers. It's certainly the residential exemption is something that I think appropriately really benefits the starter homes and homes on the you know, sort of the entry level side of the equation, and then as it moves up to the spectrum, the benefit, you know, sort of gradually decreases. But you know, as an example, I think the mayor had mentioned for if you're a home that's $500,000 in value, maybe it's a good condo or a starter home, the combination of the two will actually net you a savings of about about $1,000, I guess over 100 years it would. But it gets you about $100 savings annually on your bill when you combine the increase in the exemption with this proposed, you know, override. And if you get to, the mayor had mentioned, you get to the $700,000 range, it flips, right? So the net cost is about $100. So the override gets largely offset, I guess, by the increase in the residential exemption, but you end up with a, you know, with a much smaller bill. So certainly the two of them do work well together, you know, particularly, like I said, at the lower ends of the spectrum. And for a large number of folks, it's going to almost, you know, completely offset it at that proposed level, so.
Yeah, thank you. And let me also just clarify that these are two separate decisions. The residential exemption is something that we can choose to opt into, which we do in Malden, but that the state allows us to do that. And we already made that change at the city council. So that will be in effect, that increase to now the maximum of that residential exemption for next year. And so I mean, while they are separate, certainly part of the conversation at the council table was that is a good faith investment in hoping that folks will be willing to help support city services more, because, and we always have to say this, the residential exemption does not change the amount of money that the city raises. It doesn't actually impact commercial taxes at all. It just changes around within the residential tax base who is paying what amounts. So it's not a tax cut. We're not asking you for money on one side and cutting your taxes to cut our budget on the other. It's just that the state allows us to make this shift, and we think it's more fair to our residents and helps with home ownership. So that's why we choose to do it. Okay. I have a couple of questions about now economic development that were submitted. And one of those was on Menti what specific measures are you taking to increase commerce in Malden? Let's see. And I know that that's been a major question about economic development strategies, which are really the opportunity to grow tax revenue over time. So I'd love to actually ask our city staff to talk a little bit about the strategies for the next couple of years for economic development and doing that tax base. Before we do that really quickly, I want to just recognize some of my colleagues from the City Council who are in the room that we didn't get a chance to say hello to earlier. So City Councilor at Large Karen Colon Hayes is here. Thank you for being here. Ward 6 City Councilor Steve Winslow is here. Thank you, Steve. Ward 5 Councilor Ari Taylor is here. Thank you, Ari. And Councilor at Large-elect Michelle Luong is also here. Thank you, Michelle. Did I get everybody?
Ryan was here.
Is Ryan here? Oh, I'm sorry. Thank you, Peg. I couldn't see you. Ward 1 Councilor Peg Crow is also here. Thank you all for being here. I see School Committee Member Jen Spadafora is here from Ward 3. Thank you, Jen. Did I get everybody? Oh, okay, I see. Ward 4 Councilor Ryan O'Malley is outside the room waving at us. There's plenty of seats, Ryan, if you want to come in. Oh, okay. Okay. So yes, economic development and commercial development strategies for the longer term sustainability.
We are in the midst of a new master plan that will focus heavily on commercial development. Thanks to Council McDonald and Council Spadafora, it will focus much on Lower Commercial Street. So down near Commercial and Medford, we're going to try to do some things there that will bring more commercial entities to Malden. The other thing that I would say is it doesn't seem it on the surface, but we have had some good gets recently. At the corner of Commercial and Charles, we are now home to Old Town Trolley. They have moved their entire facility, their corporate headquarters, to our city. And then just outside here on Exchange Street, just about all of 200 Exchange near Starbucks is full. And those consist of different life science companies. As a matter of fact, one of the companies, Alstom Energy, is not only doing research in that building, but they're also manufacturing as well. So some steps, but we acknowledge we could and need to do more, and we believe that this master plan will help us do that.
And Mayor, can I just add, you mentioned 200 Exchange, which I think is a good example of how economic development, and in particular commercial development, is very much a long road, right? So 200 Exchange, some of us know it as the old Bank of America building, Bank of New England before that. It was empty for a long time, some sparse amount of square footage being used. No one had any interest in redeveloping it until the initiative that between the mayor's office and the city council of reopening Pleasant Street and redeveloping the old city hall parcel turned that entire parcel into a more attractive piece to redevelop, and had Berkeley Investments come in and really upgrade that building at risk. They had no tenants, but they believed that in doing so, they would attract them, and they are. It's a long road, the type of tenants that they bring in. They're not just sort of a retail store opening up. They are high-tech folks that are very choosy, but they're having great success. You just don't see them because they don't have storefronts, right? But it's been a 10-year odyssey to get them to the point where, that building they've invested tens and more millions of dollars in infrastructure, and now they've got clients coming. But it's taken a while, and I think that's the nature of economic development. It's not a switch that you flip. It's an environment that you create in order to make people want to be here, and I think that that's what the master plan is really all about. So thank you.
I think I'd be remiss if I didn't give a little plug for the Malden Hospital. It might be Ward 3's only chance to meaningfully contribute to the commercial base. But I think there is a misconception that it's a nonprofit. It actually is going to be a tax revenue generating parcel. I did just also want to say that, in the course of the Finance Committee meetings that Councilor McDonald has been leading over the last 6 weeks or so, we have come together. The mayor's joined us for almost, I think, every meeting actually you've been there, which is it's a huge time commitment, and we've really come together in a way that's, I think, been unprecedented and very productive. We've had total consensus on the need to talk about how to produce more commercial tax revenue. I think we are singularly driven as a council and the administration together on this point. So I just want the community to hear that this is truly, if you don't grow your tax base, you die, and that is just the reality that we are under. I think, as we've tried to, convey tonight, you levy to your limit on the residential side, and the reality of Massachusetts tax law is that you get to levy to that limit, and then you add 2.5%, and that's all the money that you have, unless you have new growth to add on top of that. That is just how we get money every year. And the limitations of the school budget are kind of, the other piece that we're fighting against. But if we don't bring in that commercial development, we don't get, it's kind of like your bonus that you get at work if you're lucky enough to work somewhere. I work for the government, so I don't actually get a bonus, but if that's like the best analogy I can come up with, is that that's sort of that found money that you can add to your base money every year, is that new growth. So we need to be driving towards that. And when we had these meetings in our council subcommittee, I think we talked about a lot of potential corridors in the city where we could look to partner with our Office of Strategic Planning and Community Development to think about, do we need to actually change our zoning to attract the kind of development that we could get more tax revenue out of when the market turns, because we aren't in a great market now, but we want to position ourselves to be there when the market turns back. So I just want the community to really hear that we're all driving in the same direction. Even if the economy isn't, in a place where we can really get what we might want right now to have those bigger dollars coming in, I think we're working to lay the groundwork so that when things turn around, we will have the zoning that we want, so that when the development community is in a better position to partner with us, we can actually do that building. So it will be a few years, but we're getting there. Yeah, for sure.
Just one other thing about commercial development. We are in the midst of filling a vacant position that was held by Kevin Duffy. He was our business development officer, and he did a great job. Everybody knew Kevin. He was a great liaison, and he was the one, if you don't know, that brought us Bodeborg here on Pleasant Street, which remains the only one in the United States. There were 8 in the world, and we're one of them. And they bring in roughly 200,000 visitors a year. And we just learned in the past few weeks that because of Bodeborg, there are 1, possibly 2 gaming-related companies that will be moving into the old Department of Elementary and Secondary Education building. So there'll be an announcement soon about definitely 1, hopefully 2. But now with Kevin retiring and laying the foundation for us, if we can figure this financial quagmire out, we do hope to add a twist to that position by the person coming in, not only being the go-to, so to speak, on commercial development, but also being a planner. So we envision this person, having a planning background and being able to, look at zoning and figure out, what it takes to bring more commercial development to our city.
Thank you. And I had a second question from Samantha LeBlanc, who submitted in advance, that asked how assessed values of homes are determined. And if we built 10,000 new units, would that change the assessed value for homes? Would they stagnate or drop the next time are they assessed? And so maybe just talking about how assessment and new growth factor into that 2.5% limit. And Dan, this seems like it's probably in your lane.
I'll give a go at it. I'm not the assessor. I am the treasurer collector, but
I promise you, I do understand that.
yeah. Could you repeat the question?
Yeah,
please?
sure. So one is, how is the assessed value of a home determined? And if we built 10,000 units, would that change the value of existing homes the next time homes are assessed? And what would be the impact on our tax levy limit?
Okay. So if we build 10,000 new homes, that would increase our tax levy limit because we would have 10,000 homes worth of new growth. What the dollar amount is, that would be to be determined. How a home is assessed is multiple factors, depending on the age, the recent sales, comparable sales, depreciation. So if you were to build a brand new property in a really nice neighborhood with comparable properties that have recently sold for $1 million, then your house would likely be assessed similar or close to that $1 million, less depreciation of the value as the assessor sees. There is some formula which I'm not exactly familiar with, that I can't really articulate that. But your property is generally valued based on recent comparable sales, and then there's generally a discount because of your house does age. But your house value can be increased in assessment when you do home improvements because you're increasing the value of your home. So you can see your assessment go up based on comparable sales as well as home improvements that you do. Or if you add a deck, then you'll have new growth, so that increases the levy and would increase the assessed value of your home. So if you added 10,000 homes, would that change the value of the surrounding homes? Well, that's a great question. If we put 10,000 homes in 5 square miles, I think we would have a density issue. So you could have a positive and a negative effect. If you have homes on top of each other and you can't walk, then you might actually have a depression in your values. So I think density is a significant factor in that. I don't know what that middle ground is as far as if we added 1,000 homes, would they all appreciate? But there are multiple factors. So to say 10,000 homes, if you added those to the city, I think you would have a hard time having significant value increase, and you may have a density issue. But
just for comparison, Dan, do you know how many housing units there are in Malden?
So there are 13,000 and change unique parcel IDs. That does include condominiums. But of that 13,000 parcels, you have multifamily, so you could have a 4-family unit, which is 1 parcel, and that would constitute, if it's a 4-unit, you would have 4 living units, but you could also have 1 parcel which has 4 condominiums, and then that would be 4 individual parcel IDs. So we have 13,000 individual parcel IDs, but as far as the total units, I am not 100% sure of exactly what that is.
Thank you. somewhere between 15 and 20,000 sticks in my mind as the number of housing units we have, just for the sense of scale about the 10,000 question. While you got the mic, Dan, we have a question from Menti. What effect is using reserves from operating expenses having or may have on our bond rating and borrowing costs?
All right, so that's a great question. I'll go right to borrowing costs. Borrowing costs are generally are determined by the market. We go out to the market to sell our bonds, and the market dictates what the price they're willing to pay on a number of factors, internally and externally. Primarily externally would be interest rates. Internally, our bond rating is the number one factor that is utilized to evaluate our ability to pay. We are currently AA, which is pretty darn good. Our gold standard would be AAA, and that's what I would like us to be at. If you have dwindling or very limited cash reserves, it does put you at risk for a downgrade. Right now, we're one of, as of 2 years ago, the DOR has a report as far as stabilization funds. We're one of 6 communities in the state that does not have any stabilization funds. That does put us at risk. So utilizing free cash in the form of subsidizing your budget is looked at negatively for bond ratings, and as you decrease your free cash, that gives us less security, and that does put us at risk. We have not had a change in our bond rating since I've been here. I certainly hope that if we have any change, it's to the positive, but using free cash does put us at risk of having a negative impact if we use it.
Okay, just a couple more for Dan. Can you explain what free cash, which is a very fun-sounding word, but is perhaps not quite as fun, and stabilization funds are? Like, what do those terms mean?
So free cash is the term that the Department of Revenue uses that I know some people are not too fond of the phrasing. Basically, it's what it comes down to is the money that we have after all of our expenditures have spent for the year and all of the funds in which we've collected, plus any previous savings or free cash that we had before. So if we had, think of it, if you had $10 in your bank account and you earned $12 and spent $12, you still have $10 in your bank account. That's your free cash year over year. So that goes up and down. We have utilized free cash before, but each year we try to grow that number by conservatively budgeting. We just are, just having those challenges with budgeting. So free cash is basically what your leftover money is. Stabilization funds are accounts that you would establish which are restricted as far as expenditures. They're restricted for purpose. Typically you would have something like a pension reserve fund would be a stabilization fund, or and then in order to spend or expend those funds, you would need a majority vote of the city council. So basically you would want to take some of your free cash and put it into your savings, a separate savings account, like you would if you're an individual, like you would with your retirement account, long-term reserves or saving for the future. So stabilization is restricted savings, and free cash is less restricted, where it does require a vote of the council, but stabilization requires 2/3 vote to then be applied.
Great, thank you for that clarification. And one more from Menti. Is the bigger budget problem for Malden capital expenses that could be paid for with a debt exclusion, or is it operating expenses? I think we got that before, but can you talk about the impact of capital expenses on the budget?
Yeah, so I think this is a great question, because the reality is we've got some deferred capital expenditures that are going to need to be addressed at some point in time in the not-so-distant future. I think it was Sarah that mentioned earlier, she had the benefit of going through all the new schools, and we joke all the time that the new schools got old. There's a bunch of roofs on these schools that are all over 20 years old now that, the beauty was that we had a bunch of new schools for a long time, and the difficult part is they're all aging, right? So capital is something that I will tell you that has been more of a luxury in terms of our annual budget. It is going to need to be something the city needs to spend more of its money on in the coming years, because we've got some things that are at the breaking point in terms of that, that expenditure line item. So it's something that we've generally, as the mayor mentioned, we'll try to look and see what we end up with free cash each year and try to take and knock some things off of that list. And if you have a particularly good year where you have some expenditures that come in under budget and you add a little bit more to free cash, then you say, let's try to take care of the heating system at the BB school, and so we've tried to do things like that, but it's in need of a more strategic long-term approach at some point in time, which is going to require some creative thinking, so.
Thanks. Okay. All right. So a couple more from Menti questions that we've received, and just as a time check, we are at about 7:20. So we'll come back in a little bit if there are more folks in the room who want to ask questions. So a couple of questions related to the impact on city services. One is, I want to live in a city with enough firefighters and public services for a dense urban population, and in a city that can pay educators more than the bare minimum required. Will the override do this? Related is, will police and fire response times suffer if there are cuts? And if we pass the $5 million number, can we guarantee no cuts for emergency services? Without an override, the next time the teacher's contract comes up, will the city have the money to increase educator salaries? So, impact on educator salaries, public safety.
Response times will be impacted. Our fire department responds to roughly 10,000 calls a year. So if we're to reduce what has already been a static number since 2013, when we came to an agreement on the minimum requirement, which is 109, there will be an impact. And just talking with our police chief today about different scenarios, there will be an impact, without a doubt. Because with a reduced number of officers, all we're going to be doing is forcing other officers who are already working their shifts. And so you're going to have, that factor of, becoming lethargic and, all that. And so there will be an impact. On educator salary, we would hope, but again, we don't know. Right now, we just began the first year of a 3-year contract, which, fingers crossed, we'll be able to make it through. But, time would tell. I wouldn't want to sit here and say to you, do this and we're good for the rest of time. I couldn't look you in the face and say that. But I can tell you it will, take us out of the danger zone that we're presently in, because using roughly $8 million a year to supplement our operating budget, it's can't be done. We have enough reserves. If we went at that rate 2 years, then the state comes in. And again, we can't do that. We've come so far as a city. If you look past what we're discussing here tonight, the values have never been better. The affordability, I know it could be more, but compared to other cities and towns around us, we're looked at as being affordable. Just meeting with our police chief today, the crime rates remain, good. We have crime, I don't want to sugarcoat it, but not that gut-wrenching, violent crime that can bring a city to its knees. So, we're in a good place, and what we're hoping to do with you is to keep it there. Because if we have to reduce services, there will be an impact, without a doubt.
All right, thank you. Another question from Menti. We've been lucky for a few years and have had little to no snow. What happens to the funds that were allocated for snow removal, salting, et cetera, in the DPW's budget?
So, annual winter snow expenses is one of the very few things that the state allows you to basically run on a 1-year in arrears basis. So we run each year what we call a snow and ice deficit, and so we'll budget, quite frankly, a relatively small amount of money, and each year you're paying for the prior year, right? So the sort of any thought that there's a big number budgeted and something left over, it just isn't the reality. It's what the past few winters have done is to sort of not have that hole get dug a lot deeper, a lot faster than what it has been, But I think if you take a look even at the snow expenditures for the last few years, you'd be surprised at how much those little storms and the ice and what have you adds up, over the course of the winter. But we budget a fraction each year of what the expenses will be, along with paying for the prior year's snow and ice removal. And it's one of the only things that works that way where we can operate on a one-year in arrear basis. So because of that, there's no money left over per se. And I should say every city pretty much does that. It's just kind of Massachusetts, one of those weird things about Massachusetts.
And just as a general point, we talked about the reserves earlier. So if there are things that are budgeted that are not spent, except for the schools, the money that doesn't get spent simply reverts back to our cash, right? And that's part of how you build up your reserves over time, is if you end up not spending things that were budgeted. But that's not we can't do that for the schools in the same way. And could you maybe just explain how that works a little bit more, Ron? Because we did have a question about that from Menti, which is what part of the school formula for 2027 or the current year is under budget?
Yeah, so of all the services that your local government provides, there's only one that the state determines how much you have to spend, and it's for your education. So there's a very complicated formula that looks at the number of students we have, the grades that they're in, the type of services that require, and they come up with a required spending amount that we have to spend. And it's sort of the partnership with the state is, if we're going to give you aid, you need to spend this amount of money. There's no other function, police, fire, DPW, general government services, that have that same requirement attached to it. So because of that, and we're a community, and there's many urban communities that fund the schools basically at that number. Just because of the challenges of our finances, there isn't an ability to fund it like somebody like Cambridge, who funds it at 220% of that number, right? So Malden is trying to just get to that number. And to Council McDonald's point, what that means is any unexpended funds at the school level have to essentially stay within the schools in order to sort of keep you at that number. And we saw this year where I think some challenges that they had with filling positions and things like that resulted in some money being turned back to the city and us falling below that net school spending number, meaning we've got to give that money back to them. So it is, it's a number that we've got to make sure that we work closely with the schools on when we develop, and it also means that within that category, unspent money can't fall to free cash because we've got to turn it around and provide it back, as opposed to every other city department. Councilor McDonald mentioned, take a 100-person police department. You have vacancies over the course of the year. If one job remains unfilled for 3 months while they try to fill it, that can generate some free cash that ends up falling back and being able to build up a little bit of the reserves, because we don't budget for open positions. We budget for sort of everything being fully staffed. But the school department doesn't participate in that exercise just because of the fact that we are right at the required net school spending, and we have to spend all the money that we try to each year to stay there. So.
Ron, you really have done yeoman's work with the formula. Could you just let the people here know, and the people watching, what you discovered about how off this formula is? Because you have found that there are cities and towns in the Commonwealth that have zero need, zero, yet they're receiving X millions of dollars.
Yeah, so again, and we never want this to come across like it's just a complaining session about the school funding formula, yet the reality is you can't recognize the challenges we have without understanding this. So the challenge that we have, I mentioned earlier the number of 44% as compared to Everett, 26%. 44% of our tax revenue and local receipts, which are excise taxes, meals taxes, 44% of ours has to go towards this formula. 26% of a neighboring community that begins with E has to go towards that. That leaves us at a great disparity. So the state, thankfully our delegation, Senator Lewis, Rep. Altrino, Rep. Donato, Rep. Lippert-Garabedian, were able to get in the budget this year the requirement that the Department of Education do a detailed study on this part of the formula. It's something that we've been pushing for 4 or 5 years, and so we are cautiously optimistic that it'll recognize the nature of this problem. The mayor's point was that one of the ways that people always say, well, how do you fund a fix? And our answer is simple. Some of the wealthiest communities in this state that show no need, I'm talking about the Cambridges, $1 billion in revenue. They spend 2.5 times per student what the law says they have to. But these state formulas give them aid anyways, just because. So our argument is one of the ways to fund it is stop giving money to communities that, quite frankly, don't need state money. And so the formula is going to be a difficult thing for folks to crack and to get settled, but we just continue to go at it from every angle. But you can't provide money to communities like Malden that need it if you're going to give it to communities like Lexington, like, I hope there's no one here from there, Lexington and Wellesley and Weston that have zero need but get collectively hundreds of millions of dollars in state aid. You can't do it. It doesn't work. So take that away and distribute it to the ones that need it, and we'll be in a lot better shape.
Thank you. Okay. No, I think we're good. And I'll also note that Ron, Mayor Christensen, myself, School Committee Vice Chair Spatafora, and some others went to a public forum recently that the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education was having about challenges on this local funding of our schools, and all submitted public comments and recommendations to this commission that is charged now to make some recommendations about changes. So there's going to be another opportunity to advocate to our legislators, and I should say not only in Malden, who they're very well acquainted with this and have certainly talked a lot about this and come before us, and we want to renew that fight with them, but we really need to also make sure that other legislators and surrounding communities really understand that impact. So trying to build that momentum to get real changes. There's going to be some opportunities, and I'm really hoping we can mobilize more folks to get involved in that in the next 6 to 12 months. Okay, I'm going to run through a couple of questions. So I got questions from Brian DeLacy and Bill Muse, and they sent a 5-page document of questions. So we're not going to get to all of those questions, but I will read the beginning of what they include, and then I'm going to give you a subset of questions from each of the 5 sections that they have asked. Unable to attend tonight's meeting. We understand we may submit questions in advance. Herewith is a long list of questions. We ask that you read the following statement into the record during the meeting and include the full list of questions in the meeting minutes, but there is no need to read each and every question organized in different sessions unless you would like to do so. We will attach these comments to the record. We anticipate minutes will be made publicly available as directed to all members of the City Council Mayor. There are not formal minutes to this. This is not a meeting of the council. We're not taking any votes. So there's no actions to record, but we will attach the documentation and the slides to the record of the public forum. So that statement is, please accept this lengthy list of questions related to the agenda for the 11/19/25 budget meeting. This list of questions builds on questions Malden News Network previously sent by email to City Council members and the Mayor on October 22nd, for which we did not receive a comprehensive response. These questions focus on addressing the city's budget deficit and the proposal to place a Proposition 2.5 tax override question on, quote, unquote, a proposed ballot for a special election. Thank you. Sincerely, Brian DeLacy and Bill Muse in association with the Malden News Network. Questions for the budget meeting to be held on 11/19/25. Section 1, legal and procedural foundations. How does Proposition 2.5 apply to commercial property?
Proposition 2.5 override, or a tax override, applies unilaterally across all real estate and personal property taxes. If you increase the levy and you set the tax rate, that applies to residential and personal property and commercial. As Ron had mentioned earlier, there's a tax shift that shifts the burden from residential to commercial, but that shift wouldn't change. The percentage would be the same. But if there is an override, then commercial property taxes would also go up in tandem.
And because you mentioned personal property, can you just say a minute about what that is? Because it's not like my property. That is not my house.
So personal property is the property that businesses own and use in operating or to perform their functions. So if you have a restaurant and your property is valued in excess of, I believe it's $5,000, the assessor goes in there, values the tools in which you use to produce your product and then sell. And then you are taxed at a personal property tax rate, which is the commercial rate. And your goods that you use to produce your services are depreciable, sorry about that, able to be depreciated, and then that can, in theory, reduce your personal property tax year over year.
I just want to say a fun fact about personal property tax. Oh, do you want to add one more thing before my fun fact? Yeah, go ahead.
So personal property tax can also apply to a second home that you are using as a rental. So if you own a second property that is not your primary residence and you are renting it, then that can be taxed at the personal property tax rate, not the residential rate.
I learned something new. The fun fact that we learned was in our City Council Finance Committee meeting about property taxes and development, and we looked at this new growth thing that we've been talking about, right? So that's new construction or newly taxable things that are beyond that levy limit of 2.5%. And we learned that in some recent years, something like half of our new growth was actually in personal property tax for the utilities, from replacement of like water mains and gas lines and things and electrical equipment and things like that. Those are all classified as personal property tax, and a big, actually, you know, when we're not building many large new buildings, like actually just the basic utility work is contributing to new growth every year. So I thought that was interesting. Okay, section 2, transparency, documentation, and oversight. What version control system is being used to track changes to the proposed language for the Proposition 2.5 tax override and all supporting documents, and where is this published? I think I can answer that by saying every paper that goes before the City Council is published through our online tracking system. It's called Legistar. It's linked from the City Council. Anytime you click on a link in the City Council agenda to a paper or a link, it takes you to that website. And so we will be posting every time any changes to this language or anything, any amendments, presentations that show up in committee meetings get attached through that system, either to a meeting if it's a presentation or to the paper, like the proposal itself, if there are different versions of it. So you can go back and look at the previous versions, you can look at the votes on those versions, and the final language for the proposal, I believe, has to be submitted to the state and approved, or there's like a form that we complete so that the final language for the ballot measure is approved by the Secretary of the Commonwealth. I'm looking at my colleagues, is that right? Yes, okay, great.
Do you want to just say that URL, thecityofmalden.legistar.com?
Yeah, thank you. Is it cityofmalden.legistar.com? Thank you so much. Go right ahead, Councilman.
Oh, yeah, I get this question a lot. Where do you find the legislation to track that? So, yeah, that'd be great to show it, actually. So it's cityofmalden.legistar, legistar.com, and you can toggle, you'll see it, there's navigation at the top. You can go to legislation and type in someone's name or the topic that you're looking for. I tend to keep it open on the calendar tab pretty much all the time, because then I can see a list of upcoming meetings. If you know...
The agenda for this meeting.
Yep. So if you know what person you're looking for or what committee you're looking to follow, so in this case it would be the Finance Committee, or you can sort by the City Council. You can basically look for the topic or the legislation or the time frame that you're looking for, and all these hyperlinks are live links, and it'll bring you into the full history of every paper that we have. Again, you can also click under people. If you go under City Council, you can look at each of us. So like if you remember, Councilor McDonald's the Finance Chair. If you click on their name, it'll show you everything that's under their purview right now, which is a lot because they're chairing Finance. And you know, you can go, there's a lot of different ways that you can navigate to what you might be looking to find, but every paper has a full history from the minutes to the agendas. Should be able to get I think the Teams recordings eventually as well. We're working to get those posted quicker than we have in the past. That's a goal that our clerk of committees and I have been working on the past few months, is to get those videos posted faster. So this is, the software behind this is called Granicus, but the URL is cityofmalden.legistar.com. So this is where you want to go, not the city website, and it's really voluminous. It goes back, I think, to about definitely 2015, at least 10 years.
Okay, and I'll give two more questions from this. One is Section 3, fiscal accountability and spending. How would each dollar of the proposed override tax increase revenue be spent? And I think you covered that, Mr. Mayor, in your presentation, as just part of the same place that all of your regular tax revenue would be spent. So all of those basic city services. And then Section 4, economic growth and commercial development. What is the economic impact of commercial vacancies in existing buildings, including those which may not be licensable for food businesses due to mandatory parking minimums? And I think the question is about, do vacancies impact the assessment of tax on a commercial property?
So the short answer is, and again, I'm no assessor, but I can, but they do, right? So part of the way that commercial property is assessed, in addition to there being a portion of it that's driven just by value, it's based upon income. So when a building is empty, and I think the most recent example was, the mayor had mentioned the old Department of Education building. When that building was empty and wasn't bringing any revenue, that drops down the value in the taxes. And you know, when the flip side, of course, is when it's full and generating revenue, it brings it up. So it does, and essentially what that does is it takes that tax burden and it spreads it across everybody else, because the levy doesn't change. So the short answer is yes, an empty property does, not something that's been empty for a month or two, but something that is a substantial property that's unoccupied, that doesn't have an income component, or it's got a limited income component, will have a reduction in taxes.
Great. I just want to go back and check and see, are there folks, I have a few more questions that were submitted online. Are there folks in the room who wanted to offer a question who hadn't had a chance to do so yet? If you want to do so, please come on down, come on forward.
Hello, can you hear me? Hey.
Yep, go right ahead.
Dave Ball, 79 Wade Street Extension, Malden. If the financial straits continue, I know some fine men and women that may get laid off across the city employee gambit. And I'm wondering, partly it's a question, partly it's a opinion, for the override. I'm wondering if our elected officials are willing to take a temporary pay cut leading up to the override, possibly after the override. It's not a lot of money. Symbolically, I think it would make a big difference to myself and others. I don't want to create waves. You guys are doing a great job. I know many of you personally, and I appreciate the work you do. Not really a question, but philosophical idea. I appreciate your time. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I'll let each of us who are elected on and up here answering questions answer that, but I will just say we got a similar comment to Menti, which was, would our elected officials be willing to take a pay cut prior to or after the override? That was me. Oh, great, there you go. I hadn't gotten through all the Menti yet, so that was still on my list. No, it's great. The system works. This is great. It was the same person for those folks who couldn't see online. So, would you like to respond?
Yeah, I'm happy to respond. And I will just say, I knew it was you, but I'm going to not share what the second half of your question was, but as soon as you came up, I knew what you were going to ask. I think this is obviously a tough question. Nobody wants to take a salary cut. I will say that the public may not be aware that we actually have an ordinance on the books that we passed 2 years ago that our mayor and council are supposed to actually start receiving cost of living increases in line with our department heads that we chose not to take up this year for obvious reasons. I do think that, you know, when we passed that 2 years ago, some of the statistics that stuck out to me when we adopted it were that our mayor had never had a salary increase ever, and that our council was essentially the lowest paid council to comparable cities. I mean, really by any metric. Most of us, this is more than a part-time job. I will say that if that's what it came down to, obviously, I don't want to see anybody get laid off and have my job be precious. So if that's what it came down to, I think all options have to be on the table. But I will say that what we get paid compared to the hours that we put in is already pretty poor. That's public sector work. And, we are taking, I think, in addition to not taking the COLA, we are going to be experiencing a pretty significant impact to our health insurance by shifting to this new plan that's going to cost a lot more for all of us who are on the insurance out of pocket. I have concerns when we skip COLAs and don't plan for incremental increases for elected officials, that we will have a situation where folks aren't able to serve that are representative of the community. So while I might be able to afford to take a pay cut, I think you'll get to a point where if particularly our chief executive's role is so out of whack with what other comparable positions for large cities pay, you're gonna get to a point where someone with with caregiving responsibilities is just not able to afford to consider taking a job like that, and that just eliminates a lot of people in the community from being able to serve. So I think it gets to my larger point that I was making earlier of trying to think of long-term of the health of the community. So the short answer is yes, if it was absolutely necessary, if we had to do that, I think all options have to be on the table, but I don't think it's the prudent thing to do. I think that our salaries, the reality is that the salaries what we pay for elected positions comparable to basically every other community in Massachusetts are poor, and we have to own that. So those things can both be true, and that would be my answer.
Yes, I would consider it if it would be helpful to the cause and meaningful. I wouldn't do it just for optics.
I'll say for myself, I think you expressed my sentiments very well, Councilor Linehan, and we don't do it for the money, but I think everything needs to be on the table. And I'll also add that there's another dimension to the city council budget, which is the funds that we have to support community events, which also is probably something that should be considered for reduction before we get to salaries. I am both willing to consider it, and also I am really in this process, to speak for myself as the finance chair, trying to stay away from things that feel performative, trying to stay away from things that feel like it doesn't actually address the gaping hole. We often get questions about things that might be good ideas, but don't generate actually meaningful amounts of money. And you can't really manage a city of hundreds and hundreds of employees and tens of thousands of residents with $5,000 of savings here and 20 grand of savings there. It's always good to think about those things, but that's just a general management question, and I don't want us to confuse the question of what is the right thing by any of our employees and public servants vis-a-vis the question of how do we actually solve this problem, which is that we do not have enough money to pay for the city staff and services that we have right now. And if we can't come up with solutions to that, we're here talking about what the impact of that is. So that's the other piece that I would add from my perspective. Yeah. Okay. We're getting closer to the end. I do have a couple of statements that folks have submitted via email that I want to read. Did you want to ask did you want to make a question? All right, come on forward.
Thank you very much. First of all, thank you all for being here. I know that none of you get any pleasure out of what you're proposing, and I know that you're doing what you can to make it as least burdensome on the community as possible. I'd like to bounce a little bit off the last.
I'm really sorry. Can you just identify yourself also?
William Spatafora, Ward 3. I'd like to bounce off the last commenter a little bit about your pay cut. I don't believe anybody should work for free. You definitely do put a lot of hours into this community, and whether we all agree with everything politically, it doesn't matter. You put the hours in. But there is one particular thing that the city council does get, and I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, I believe it's $5,000 a year that you use that money towards 4th of July events, community events. Those are, great events when we can afford to have them. That's $5,000 times 11 city councilors. I've heard many times when speaking with other councilors when I brought up certain particular line items, small money, small money. Small money adds up to large money. We have a lot of stipended positions in the city. We have a poet laureate in the city. Does the poet laureate keep the lights on in the city, pay a salary? All right, it's small money, but is it necessary? These stipended positions, people apply for them, volunteer for them because of the love for this city, not because they're doing it for the $2,000 or $3,000 a year that they may be getting. They do it because they want to be part of this community. I'm thinking that stipended positions should be something that we could be looking at to cut. The $5,000 that the city council gets additional money, that could be cut. I feel that the city has to do a little bit on their end on certain items as well. I know that you've mentioned tonight about budget cuts. No one likes it, but before the community has to start reaching into their pocket, the city has to do their part as well. So I think there's a lot of outside the box thinking that if we take the opportunity to look at it, there's money to be saved there. So thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Billy. That was like exactly 2 minutes. And just to say, the $5,000 that you're referencing is the same accounts that I was also referencing. So for folks who are not aware, each city councilor is allocated control of a $5,000 community events budget, which we have to use for public purposes. It doesn't go to us personally, but we can use it to support community events and other priorities in the city. And I believe our ward councilors get an additional.
Yeah, just to be really clear, it's actually $10,000. We have.
I get 5.
So there's $5,000 for the 4th of July that every councilor gets, including at large, I think, to spend if you would wish to contribute, which you're very generous and I appreciate. And then there's $5,000 for ward improvement. I think there's things that we could look at doing differently. I know some of our at-large councilors have reached out to start that conversation about, maybe we consolidate events or think about different ways to do those. Like I said with the salary question, I think really everything has to be on the table. And Billy, I agree. I think a lot of our boards and commissions, people aren't out here for the, $150 stipend that they get for each meeting or whatever that is. And not all of our boards get that stipend. So for me, I think there's been a parity issue for many years as well. Some get it, some don't. It's not equivalent to the amount of work that people put in. I think, even look at the school committee versus the council. Yeah, there's a lot of things that we could reopen if we wanted to look at what those structures are. I think all things have to be on the table, and we need to be creative and open-minded when we start to look at all of this.
Finally, Mr. Spatafora, after several months, we're in agreement. We are looking at all those areas that you mentioned internally, and I believe pending City Council review, they will be a part of the puzzle that we need to solve.
All right. So I just want to read some of the statements that we've received, in respect for the people who took the time to do that. I have one that is, well, actually, this one is as much of a question. With the rising cost of food, heating bills, et cetera, how could city officials think raising property taxes is a good idea? What other options have been discussed? Have any other options been explored? And is there a way to speed up the development? I think that means economic development. And I will say that that's very similar to one of the Menti questions that we got, which is what other options the city has explored. And so I know some of those were on the slide that you gave, Mr. Mayor, but maybe you could just reiterate some of the things that we've already done to save money and keep costs low.
There's a few primary areas. One is switching our employees to the state health insurance plan. Another one is sending down a round of cuts that would total roughly $2 million. And then with this override, we believe we'll be able to get back on track. So those are the primary solutions that we're focused in on. And we will keep you updated as to our efforts working with our state delegation to address some of the impacts that are causing us to have to do this.
Yeah, and we do have another comment. I'm just gonna add a couple other things that surfaced in our finance committee discussions in response when we asked this question. One was we've restructured our pension obligations to extend the timeline for payment a little. That saved the better part of $1 million, I think something like $700,000-800,000 a year. We did that about 2 years ago. That's not a thing that the state's gonna allow us to do again, but we did go ahead and do that. We worked very hard to maximize the amount of grant revenue that we can use appropriately to support city services. So that includes, like, a lot of grants come with this admin percentage you can take, so we take the maximum there. We try to really leverage things like our road paving and construction as a part of water projects, because water projects are paid through a different source of money, but we try to maximize those things there. So there's a lot of that optimizing that folks often ask about, and I just want to say I really observe city staff doing that and asking those questions and trying to make sure that we're using those other sources where we can to pay for things so they don't hit the operating budget. So I just wanted to surface those other two things as well, in addition to the just not growing trying to grow a lot of positions or spending, and reducing the debt load, which we already talked about, which has come down from, I think, about $15 million to $7 million in the last 10 years or so. So that's the list of things that we're currently talking about. Yeah, please come forward.
Yes, my name is Steve Champer. I'm from Ward 3. Last summer in Clifton Street were torn up for the whole summer. We were inconvenienced the whole summer. Now you have a new contractor in there doing the same work again. Why can't you have the same contractor that did the work before, hold them responsible for fixing it for free? Because if I did something like that, I would have to go back and fix whatever I did wrong for free. And why are we selling commercial properties to nonprofits, like the charter school in Maplewood Square and Davison Chevrolet on Eastern Ave? Those were taxable income properties. Now they're not. What's the reason for that? I understand, I don't have a problem with the charter school, but you can't be selling off commercial property that's bringing in income to the city and not to a nonprofit that doesn't pay taxes.
Yeah, I mean, I guess on the property piece, and I know is it working? Oh. On the property piece, and I know it's something that's been talked about in the community, the city does a transaction between two private parties that takes a parcel from being taxable to non-taxable doesn't require the approval of the city. We have literally no say in it, so it's a private party transaction that, as frustrating as it may be for folks, the city doesn't have any say in that. So it's happened a lot. I think it's a school trying to respond to to their needs, but it does take properties off the tax roll, but it doesn't require our approval. There's literally nothing on the city. We haven't sold city property. It's always, private transactions that happen between two parties. That's just kind of part of the market.
Okay, thank you.
And then as for Clifton and Summer, one thing I've learned about infrastructure repairs over the years is that it's not an exact science. I too was disheartened to learn that after we had done all that work up there, the grid had to come back because of a unexpected, unannounced gas leak. But they are required as part of the permit to put it back together curb to curb. Obviously, we tried to limit that as best we can during our infrastructure meetings, meaning that, all of the staff that are in the area of infrastructure work are at the same table, and we're trying to align water work and lead line removal and gas line replacements. But again, you just never know that even though you have this coordinated effort, something can spring when you're done and you think you won't be back there for 25 years. So, but I can guarantee you, in the area that you identify, they are required to put that back together curb to curb.
And I'll just add, because I was obviously incredibly frustrated to see that as well. Working with our tree warden, we have also gotten National Grid to agree to give us a couple $1,000 credit at a nursery to replace and more so give us credit back for the trees that they're taking out, because there were young trees there that would otherwise have probably been able to survive if not for the work. So they're basically killing new trees, and due to his negotiation, we're getting not just replacements, but also, like I said, a monetary credit to be able to replace that and more above and beyond in exchange for the fact that this was an inefficient way to have done this. So we push back. This is something that we didn't always do a great job at, but we'll be able to get that money out of them as well. So in addition to what the mayor was able to share, we are getting money too.
Yeah, the question was, why can't you have the contractor that originally did the work now do the work that will be required when they're done? Because they have different subcontractors. We can't dictate to National Grid who they're to use when they're putting back together roads that they have disrupted. We certainly can monitor the work and make sure that it's in accordance with our requirements, but we can't tell them who to use. I wish we could, but we can't.
Okay, so folks, we are at 8 o'clock. I do want to just take a couple minutes to read through the comments that were submitted in advance. They're not long. So first, I have one comment from Jim Sumner. Dear Malden City Council, so we'll just make sure, we'll just kind of time these for each, to make sure they don't go over 2 minutes, but Jim says, I write regarding the public hearing this evening to express my objection to a tax override ballot question. First and foremost, it is clear to this taxpayer someone has not been paying attention to the budget. I come to this conclusion because of the fact that this override question seems to come from nowhere. If the city was heading off a fiscal cliff, why did it take until September this year for the council or mayor to identify potential budget concerns? That being said, I am also quite disturbed by the fact that the city council believes one public forum is enough for a matter of such importance. I ask the council to hold no less than 3 public forums on this subject before they vote to put any override question on the ballot. I've been watching the finance committee meetings. I saw and continue to see no real proposals for serious budget cuts. Further, as I've already stated, why did the council's finance committee not let taxpayers know months ago about the fiscal crisis that many councilors have claimed they saw coming? As a taxpayer and longtime resident of Malden, I look at city hall positions online with some of the spending and can clearly see where some things could be cut. No one wants to see people lose their jobs for the city or provide less services, but if the city has positions and services that should not be city functions, these jobs and services should go. The mayor and the city council are doing a disservice to their employees by not planning. City councilors, ask yourselves, wouldn't a 6 or 7 month layoff notice be better than a month or 2 notice? Unnecessary management positions in departments that did not exist a few years ago should be looked at as part of serious cuts. I close with one more question. Why can't the city council mayor's office make serious cuts before asking taxpayers to adjust their budgets to pay more? Sincerely, James Sumner, 659 Highland Avenue. I will just say in response to that, I think we've talked a lot about cuts. In terms of public forums, this is a sole public forum, but there actually are 3 opportunities for the public to offer comment. This is one. The first time this was introduced to the city council, whenever it's on the main council agenda, you can submit public comment. And we did get public comments when it was first then on the city council agenda. It will come back to the city council floor, and that will be your 3rd opportunity to submit comments for or against, and those get included in the record. And I will also just note that the city council has passed multiple resolutions in past years. I think we did one in 2023, 2 in 2023, 1 in 2024, about the budget crisis that we saw coming and, pointing towards potential solutions. I think transparently we spent a lot of the time since then trying to work on the school funding issues and had really hoped to make more headway on that between then and now. But I do just want to say clearly that I think the public statements from the mayor and his team have been really consistent on that through every budget process and budget submittal letter, as well as the resolutions that the city council has approved in regard to, or has passed to make it clear to each other and to the public that this is something we care about. Okay, I've got a couple more to read. This is from Deb Giswaldo, president of the Malden Education Association. Our teachers union, who writes, Dear Malden City Councilors, on behalf of more than the 700 members of the Malden Education Association, I write to express our strong support for fully funded city services and appropriately staffed municipal departments. We understand the council will soon vote on whether to place a Proposition 2.5 override before the voters in early 2026. We urge you to advance this measure to the ballot so that the people of Malden can participate directly in this important decision. Our city is approaching a pivotal moment. Without additional revenue, Malden will be forced to make cuts that touch nearly every aspect of civic life. Public safety, services for seniors, educational supports, access to community programs would all be placed at risk. Educators and municipal employees are already working within systems stretched thin, and any further reduction in personnel or services will have a disproportionate effect on families and neighborhoods across the city. Malden residents rely on timely emergency response, accessible library and city hall hours, stable school staffing, and a wide array of programs that foster community well-being. It should not become the norm for residents to face longer wait times, reduced access to public services, or loss of programs that contribute to a vibrant and functioning city. Our members ask a fundamental question: what resources and commitments are needed to ensure that every department can operate at a level that meets the needs of our growing community? We recognize the importance of the proposed $5.4 million override, but also acknowledge it provides only a temporary solution. We urge the council to begin planning for longer-term financial strategies that move beyond short-term measures and toward a stable and sustainable city budget. Malden deserves a financial framework that supports growth rather than simply preventing decline. We are also concerned about the proposed February election date. Severe winter weather may limit turnout, especially for older residents, working families, and individuals with mobility challenges. We encourage the City Council to consider alternative dates to maximize voter participation and ensure that the outcome of the override vote reflects broad community engagement. The members of the Malden Education Association care deeply about the future of the city. We want Malden to remain a community where families can thrive, where municipal workers have the resources they need to provide high-quality services. If an override is not passed, the resulting cuts and potential layoffs will have far-reaching consequences. We ask the council to clearly outline what reductions residents can expect should the city be forced to move forward without additional revenue. We stand ready to work alongside the council, community members, and civic leaders to secure a stronger and more stable future for our city, and respectfully urge you to vote to place the override on the ballot. Explore long-term solutions and ensure a fair and accessible election process. Sincerely, Deborah Jeswaldo, President of the Malden Education Association. Couple more comments. This is from Rachel Surrett at 50 Pierce Street. Rachel writes, I am a resident of Malden, writing to express my strong support for the proposed Proposition 2.5 override for fiscal year 27. I believe this measure is not only reasonable but necessary for our city. I support for the following reasons. Malden is under-resourced in comparison to neighboring cities, but we are still required to fund public schools the same way. Is that the most natural answer? Raising taxes seems appropriate. It would be one thing if Malden is overspending or misspending, but as the FAQ page on the City of Malden website, yeah, people are reading it, points out, we spend significantly less per capita. Limited resources, okay, raise taxes. Without the tax override, staff and important departments are at risk. As a member of Malden's Commission on Climate Action and Sustainability, I've seen firsthand how limited resources constrain our ability to meet the community's needs and long-term climate goals, and potentially cutting these services are not an option. Raised taxes sounds good. I support this override so our city can continue to thrive rather than face painful cuts. Please count on my vote in favor. I encourage you to support and advance this proposal. Thank you for your time and service to the community. This is from Karen Buck Gilbert, 323 Forest Street. Dear members of the City Council, I'm writing to support the 2.5 tax override for the upcoming fiscal year 27 and onwards. Our budget deficit needs to be rectified so that we can move forward with the continuing betterment of our city, schools, public amenities, and supporting the underserved population of Malden. We need to change the perspective from taxation to investment in the health of our city. It is our civil duty to support our schools, our library, our parks, and our city staff. We need to ensure that our police, fire, and public works departments can do their jobs of public safety with the highest support from the residents. We all need to chip in to ensure our city is in a healthy position to thrive and to be attractive to new businesses. Working with averages, an additional $30 per month, we can do this together. For the homeowners who feel they shouldn't pay more than the average, please invest in the equity of Malden to ensure that your home equity doesn't devalue due to a debt-ridden municipality. Thank you, Karen Buck. Three or four more of these. And so I'm just going to summarize. This is a comment in support from Lindsay McCluskey at 23 Silver Street, Lindsay lives here with her family and wants to, supports a tax override, feels that taxes are reasonable now and could pitch in more, and wants to know whether $5 million is too low a number. Want to make sure we use this important opportunity to get things right. This is a message from Rebecca Smith, who is a member of the Union of the Malden Public Library. Strongly supports the proposed override so that we can invest in our community. The staff at the Malden Public Library works very hard to support the needs and interest of everyone. By passing an override, we can avoid devastating cuts to our services and positions to keep the community strong and vibrant. This is an email from Sean Bonneau, 47 Perkins Avenue. I'm in favor of the Prop 2.5 override, both in placing it on the ballot and voting for it personally. Malden has never passed an override, so we've been struggling to keep up with inflation, Given inflation in the last 5 years, 2.5% is nowhere near enough. I care about keeping Malden and can afford $20 to $30 per month in taxes once in 45 years. So believe we should put it on the ballot and let the Malden voters decide. And then I just want to close this one. I'm going to try to read this entirely. This is from Pat Kinnan, Vice President of the Malden Police Patrolmen's Association. Dear members of the Malden City Council, I'm writing on behalf of the Malden Police Patrolmen's Association to respectfully express our strong support for the proposed Proposition 2.5 override and to highlight the urgent need for additional resources to maintain public safety in our community. As you know, Patrol Division is the core of the Malden Police Department and currently authorized for 78 officers, yet we have consistently operated below that number for many years. Staffing numbers will soon decrease even further with multiple confirmed retirements scheduled for the new year, likely reducing our staffing level to a number that is not sustainable for a city of Malden's size, demographics, or call volume. This reduction will have significant impacts: longer response times for emergency calls, fewer officers on the street, particularly during overnight and high-demand hours, increased strain on remaining personnel, contributing to burnout, overtime costs, and reduced retention, reduced capacity for proactive policing, community engagement, traffic enforcement, and specialized units, risks to officer safety, especially when staffing falls below minimum safe levels. The men and women of the Malden Police Patrolmen's Association are committed to serving this community with professionalism, compassion, and dedication. However, we cannot meet these expectations without adequate staffing and resources. An override would provide the financial stability needed to hire and train new officers, maintain essential public safety operations, and prevent further erosion of the services our residents rely upon. We understand the difficult decisions facing the council, but we believe that investing in public safety is an investment in the quality of life for every resident, business owner, and visitor in Malden. Ensuring that our department remains properly staffed is not only a matter of keeping pace with retirements, it is a matter of protecting the safety and well-being of the entire community. On behalf of the patrolmen and the entire department, we respectfully urge the City Council to support the Proposition 2.5 override. Thank you for your time, leadership, and continued dedication to the City of Malden. Sincerely, Patrick Kinnan. And those are the comments that we received in advance. So that will conclude our public forum. Thank you to those who stayed to the end. We went a little bit late, but I'm glad we got so many opportunities to ask questions and have dialogue. I think we will be updating the FAQ on this website, the Prop 2.5 website. That is at cityofmalden.org/override, override. That's 2 R's. And you can also find it linked on the homepage of the city website. So thank you to the folks who were here. We had a great turnout. I'm sure folks were watching online, and this is going to be replayed, rebroadcast on Urban Media Arts, so you can also watch it there or watch the YouTube at your convenience. If you would like to submit comments or questions, we do urge you to reach out to the mayor, to the city councilors. We do have a handy email, which is citycouncil@cityofmalden.org if you want to send something to all of us on the council. We will be talking more about this and potential changes. I heard very clearly in this meeting, a question about whether we need to consider other amounts, higher amounts, other options, whether we should push the date. I think we're clearly looking into that. So we will be talking about those at finance meetings and council meetings in the next 2 to 3 weeks. So tune in and watch for more on that. And I want to give my colleagues, Council President Linehan and then the mayor, the last word, and then we'll close our forum today.
Yeah, I know we're a little over time, so I'll be brief. Just want to thank everybody again for coming out. Want to reiterate that if you have further questions, be in touch. We will be rebroadcasting, and we will be having additional forums, as Councilor McDonald said. So stay engaged, send us your thoughts, send us your questions, and thank you so much for your time.
Again, thank you all for being here, and for those online. Again, this is a critical moment, but one that I think we can meet together.
Thank you, and that concludes our forum.